Hello and welcome. We are rolling on with Harry Potter Abridged, ladies and gentlemen. We are back again. Um, and we are primed for at least one good tangent off the bat here. Anyway, right. So this is Harry Potter Abridged. I said that. We are in. If you're just joining us, we are in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This is chapter number 9, and it is called "The Writing on the Wall." Um. So as our last chapter ended, yet again, our infamous, famous, beloved, all of the above trio happened upon the scene of problems, in this case, a crime. They see all this water on the floor, then they look up and they see Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, and yeah, and then before they can get away from the scene, like all of the hallways crowd with the students leaving the feast. It's Halloween. Um, Wait, is it Halloween? That's right. All of a sudden, I'm like all because I've been listening to the books too lately, but I'm like way ahead of where we are here. And so suddenly I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, the Death Day party was on Halloween. That's right. It was a Halloween feast. All right. I just had a one of those moments where for a minute there I thought I was just completely off base, and so right. Anyway, and so that was how the last chapter ended, was with everybody coming up, and oh, and Malfoy shows up too, right, with his enemies of the air beware, which was scrawled on the wall. Refresher, in like unremovable blood, which I well, whatever. Anyway, um, so then we hear a voice at the beginning of this chapter. That's how it starts. Somebody saying, "What's going on here? What's going on here?" And it is, and of course, Filch. And Filch shows up, and he sees his cat, and he freaks out because he assumes immediately that Mrs. Norris is dead, which, to be fair, is not a horrible assumption because she's stiff and she's hanging from a torch bracket. Um, so yeah, but and then then Filch sees Harry, and yeah, of course, because Harry saw his quick spell course. Filch is all like, I don't really know why. It's not exactly logical to think that just because Harry found out that Filch was a squib, which he didn't actually find out yet because Harry doesn't know what a squib is. We're going to find out in a few more paragraphs that that's the case. Anyway, but for whatever reason, Filch, maybe because he just knows that he's been so shitty to students, including Harry, that maybe he just thinks somebody had it in for him. I don't really know. Oh, look, that's the air conditioner coming on. That's kind of loud, huh? Cute. I'm gonna cut that off. Right. So again, Filch thinks that Harry must have it in for him, and that Harry killed his cat, and he's freaking out. I mean, he's like, "You've killed her," and he's like, "I'll kill you!" Like, Filch goes with "I'll kill you," like, pretty fucking intense, in front of like a hall full of students too. I never really thought about it like that, but it makes you wonder, like, I mean, I know Dumbledore is like infinitely loyal to people, but you get the sense that Filch has probably been there longer than that. And like, well, maybe he doesn't predate Dumbledore. Dumbledore's really old. Um, but like, I guess maybe in a way it serves him to have a curmudgeony old man like be the one that kind of has like sort of enforces some of the rules instead of him. I don't know. It's just one of those things where I'm like, Why Dumbledore? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, and so yeah, Dumbledore's like, Argus, ixnay on the ilk, bro. Like, no. So, of course, and so we get the regular contingent of teachers that always sort of like follows Dumbledore into the room. It's or into this onto the scene or whatever. It's kind of almost cartoonish in a way to me. I mean, like just because it's almost always the same ones, or at least like they might shift a little bit depending on who's at the school, but more often than not, it's like, I mean, and I get McGonagall because she's deputy headmistress, but anyway, and of course Lockhart happens to be there too in this particular case. Da, 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 da. And so yeah, Dumbledore's like leading everybody away, and of course he asks Harry, Ron, and Hermione to come with him. And Lockhart suggests his office because he's Lockhart and always wants to have some sort of way to play into the importance of the situation. So, and Lockhart's looking all excited. Everybody else is, like, what the fuck's going on? Then we get a look of of Lockhart's office. Like they come in, and of course the Lockharts in pictures are like dodging out of their frames with their hair and rollers, which is just ridiculous. But perfect at the same time. And so Dumbledore brings Mrs. Norris in and starts looking at her. And he's all like up close looking at her, like with his face right up to her and stuff. And he's Dumbledore, like, does things that nobody else really does until like Voldemort late in the series. Like Dumbledore does all kinds of wandless magic, and then he uses his wand too, of course. But which makes sense. I mean, he's old, he's extremely intelligent, and he studied a lot, like starting young, and was always kind of like one of the best. I mean, it makes sense, but it's just like when you pay attention to like the things that Dumbledore does versus the shit that everybody else does, and you kind of like see what the potential of being a wizard in this world really is, which is that you could practically do fucking anything. I mean, not everything, but lots of things. Anyway, because I mean, he's just like checking Mrs. Norris out, and like he's not using his wand at first. He does eventually use his wand for something too, I think. But anyway, and he's using his fingers to touch her again. So it's like he's just using his body, which I mean makes sense in a way. Like obviously the wand isn't where the magic comes from. It's a thing to channel it with, and I guess you can learn to use your body or your hands or whatever to channel. Anyway. And McGonagall's also looking pretty close. So, I mean, and of course she's not exactly young, and she's extremely talented too, so who knows what she's doing. Snape is also there. And so there's like your two guarantees. If a group of teachers like sort of like appears behind Dumbledore, it's going to be McGonagall and Snape at least. It seems like at one point Sprout was sometimes there, but like then not, sometimes it's just those two. I'm trying to think now. I felt like I had like a little roster in my head at one point, but it's like I'm not getting there right now. It's like never Flitwick, it seems, like it's and it's never any of the teachers that like say Hermione has that nobody else in the story has either. Like we never really know much about like Sinistra or there's another one, but anyway, whatever. Charity Burbage. She's never even mentioned before or later, but she was a Muggle studies teacher apparently. Somehow Hermione never mentions her. Right. That was not the tangent I was thinking I was going on. So let's proceed. Hang on, we have to hydrate. Just water, folks. Just water. But needed. and we see that Snape's there, and it says that he's wearing a most peculiar expression, and Harry thinks that he's trying hard not to smile, because anything to get Harry and company in trouble, mainly Harry. And of course Lockhart's just running his fucking mouth because he's like a talker, and he's going on about what he thinks killed her, and it was definitely the a curse. It was probably the transmorgraphian, that one, torture. And of course he's like, oh, if I had just been there, I could have done the counter curse, and everything would have just been spiffy. And Lockhart's really good at turning on a dime too, because like he's saying all this shit, and then let's see, hang on. Dun, 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 dun. Filch is having dry, racking sobs. And Harry, Harry's like feeling sorry for, or he said he couldn't help but feeling a little bit sorry for Filch, even though, and of course it doesn't say this bit, but I'm like, also Filch just said, I'll kill you. So, the fact that Harry has any sympathy is pretty fantastic. I mean, especially considering it's Filch in the first place. And then he yelled, I'll kill you. And so we find out that Dumbledore is muttering strange words. So he's kind of like doing a little chant action, some little magic incantation, perhaps. And now he's tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand. Dun, 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 dun. Lockhart's going on with his stories. And all the Lockharts in the portraits are like giving him like moral support. They're like nodding in agreement and shit, like he's got a built-in audience of himself. It's pretty amazing. I wonder if they just came back in with their hair and rollers still, or if they got it all out. And so then, so Dumbledore stands up and announces that, in fact, Mrs. Norris is not dead, unlike everybody was assuming, especially Lockhart. And so, and Filch is all like, what? What? And Dumbledore's like, she's been petrified. That's why she's all stiff and whatnot. And so Lockhart, again, as I was saying a minute ago, he turns on a dime. He's like, I thought so. Right. And so Dumbledore's like, but I don't know how it happened. And that's when Filch jumps back to blaming Harry, and Dumbledore's like, nah, bro. Nah, no second year could do this shit, fam. It ain't like that. So, and Filch is just like, no, it's him. And then he's like, you saw what he wrote on the wall, and he's like, and that's when he says he knows I'm a squib, and Harry's like, first of all, never touched Mrs. Norris. Second of all, what's a squib? I don't know. And Filch doesn't believe it. He's like, he saw my quick spell letter, which he did, but Harry had never heard of a squib, so he would have never had a reason to suspect that he was one, since he didn't know that categorization existed. And so this is where I wanted to tangent a little bit, because there's been, well, first of all, somebody posted oh god, I feel bad now. Hang on a second. Dun, 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 dun. Using the internet. Dun, 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 dun. What was it? Man, I can't remember. Damn it. No, it was Emily. Right. Okay. See, I couldn't remember. I knew Mandy had commented on it amongst other people, but right. So anyway, some interesting facts from these 2014 UK editions of the Harry Potter. There was like all these additional like little factoids, which probably by now are on Pottermore anyway. But anyway, one of them was about a squib that had gotten as far as putting the Sorting Hat on his head before being discovered to be a squib. So I, of course, decided to do a little search, and I found the Pottermore page about squibs. Hairless oyster, I am hydrating per your recommendation. So squibs, I mean, most of the stuff, I mean, we kind of learn after this about them a little bit in this chapter, but just to kind of give a little bit more information, because there's a few things that I had been wondering about, and if I'm not mistaken, this pretty much cleared most of it up. So obviously squibs are essentially the opposite of muggleborns. They are non-magic people born to wizarding parents. And we find out here, too, that they're actually kind of related to muggleborns, literally, in the sense that what a muggleborn is somebody who is like a descendant of a squib, usually without that knowledge, which is why they're considered muggleborns in the sense that, like, they're raised by two people who have no magic abilities and have no knowledge that there's any such a thing as the wizarding world, and that they have, this gene in their past. So anyway, but muggleborns aren't born truly of people who've never ever had magic in their family. It's always someone who's been descended however many generations past a squib, and they sort of like flip and like the gene turns on or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's without using the words genetics and genes, that's pretty much how it's sort of framed in a way, like that it's just sort of like something that I guess is dominant most of the time, and then like occasionally goes recessive and then stays there for a while. I don't really know. I don't know enough about genetics to be speaking knowledgeably. So anyway, and so of course, we find out too that a lot of squibs lead muggle lifestyles, and some even go to muggle schools. And I would think that most of them go to muggle schools because they can't go to Hogwarts or to a magic school. Sure, some of them could be homeschooled, I guess, but some do choose to cut themselves off, obviously. But then plenty choose to either stay in the magical world or work as allies, like Mrs. Fig, who's Harry's neighbor and actual, not necessarily protector, but his watcher, and then of course Filch, who hard to say that he works in harmony with wizarding kind, but he does work at the school. And then, of course, as we would imagine, they deal with the same kind of prejudices that muggleborns and muggles do from people who are, consider themselves purebloods and who are like, the shitty people. And so then, so this is one of the, there was a few reasons I wanted to mention this stuff, but one of them was the whole how muggleborns are come about. But so there was this guy named Angus Buchanan who lived quite some time before Harry, but not like ages and ages, just like like 90 years or so, quite a while, but not like centuries and centuries. Anyway, and he wrote a book called My Life as a Squib in 1900. And it was released, obviously, in the wizarding world, not in the muggle world, because they wouldn't know what that is, and that would be confusing and would break the statute of secrecy. But anyway, so it ended up being like one of these things where like it was the work that sort of like dare we say, broke the glass ceiling for squibs in a way. Not really, but it did make a significant difference. It changed people's views, and a lot there was a lot less bigotry and bad treatment after that. It didn't go away, but it was greatly decreased. But we also find out shortly after that it turns out Mr. Buchanan is the unnamed squib from the previous list. He is the one who hitched a ride on a friend's broom, because you can do that if you're a squib. You can also see the things that like you can see dementors and things like that. Those things are real, and they can see ghosts and poltergeists and stuff like that. So they do have like just a few things that distinguish them from straight up muggles. Also, like the thing that Mrs. Fig and Filch have with their cats is definitely a little bit more like a wizarding like link. And apparently, we also find out that Mrs. Fig's cats have been bred with Kneasels, which are like a magical creature that looks like a cat. So hers are a little bit more enhanced, as it were, or just magical. Let's see. Anyway, so yeah, our squib hero, Mr. Angus Buchanan, he got all the way to Hogwarts, and basically kind of as a last ditch effort. I mean, he got in, and so he didn't get a letter, of course, but he hitched a ride, and he ran up on. He kind of crashed the sorting ceremony, and like jumped in front of somebody in line and rammed the hat on its head. And it was the hat was not rude. Apparently, the hat was nice, and said that he was what did it say? That he was a good-hearted chap, but no wizard. So yeah, he was the first and only squib to get to the sorting hat, and we see now that it wasn't like he was completely blended in. Like he totally like gate crashed, so to speak. He caught a ride. He probably hid out for a minute, and then like once they were in there doing the sorting, he like ran in and made it happen. But hey, you gotta admire his heart. I'm sure that plenty of people that were born that way probably felt similarly. So, let's see. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, a couple more little things. Sorry, and then we'll get back to our chapter here. Because so we find out that twins can be squibs. We find out, and of course they make reference to the Weasley twins who are not. But then like, basically saying that Fred and George are kind of like the most identical you can practically get. Whereas then you get like the Patel twins, who are both witches, but one's in one is in Gryffindor, one is in Ravenclaw? Yeah, Ravenclaw. And then we get another, there's just another mention of some people that are not, they're just people from history, not anybody in the story. But there's, so one was like completely a muggle, or a squib, sorry, and the other was a witch. And then we also find out that Umbridge was born of a Muggle mother, and had a squib brother. So just makes her actions that much more hypocritical. But apparently, her family completely split apart before it was all over with. She's siding with her father, and obviously her mother and brother together. So that turns out there's probably like at least one good side to Umbridge's family, the one she doesn't talk to. And let's see. Right. So, and as we mentioned earlier, they can be integrated into the magical world, because they're born into it, so they're sort of allowed the secrets, and they can they can see things. They could participate to a large degree. There are things to do in the wizarding world that don't have to involve magic. So yeah, that's the bulk of our little squib knowledge. Thanks almost entirely to Pottermore. But yeah, there you go. Squibs, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so and then we're back to the chapter, and Snape is there in the shadows because he's Snape. And he's like, if I might speak, headmaster. And so, yeah, he's like, well, maybe they were just in the wrong place, blah, blah, blah. But everything is suspicious. Why were they here? Blah, blah, blah. They talk about, so they tell the story of the Death Day party and what they were doing. And then, of course, he's like, but then why not go to the feast? Blah, blah, blah. And Ron's like, because, we weren't hungry. And his stomach growls after that. And anyway, so yeah, Snape's like trying to like get Harry like taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team and like all this kind of shit because he thinks that he's not telling the full truth or whatever. And McGonagall's like, bruh, really? Take him off the Quidditch team? He didn't do anything as far as we know, and there wasn't a broomstick involved. What the fuck you talking about? So I do love that she will, call him out like right then and there. She never really liked him. She just does a really good job of being diplomatic most of the time, but sometimes she gets pushed over the edge. You just don't want to fuck with Professor McGonagall. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and so yes, Dumbledore's like, yeah, nah, innocent until proven guilty. So, and Snape's like, rah. And Filch is freaking out. He's like, my cat, I want punishment, because of course he does. He lives for the punishment of students. And Dumbledore's like, bro, chill. We're gonna be able to save her. She's not dead. It's all good. We got Sprout's got the mandrakes. We'll be able to make up the stuff. And Lockhart's like, no, I'll make it. I've done it 100 times. And Snape's like, yeah, see, I'm the potions master. Also, you're a jackass. So, yeah. So we go round and round with everybody kind of one-upping each other a little bit. Anyway, and so Dumbledore finally lets Harry, Ron, and Hermione go. Because, I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot they could do other than just tell them what basically happened, which wasn't a lot. Of course, Harry does neglect to mention the voice that he heard, which, I mean, obviously, in retrospect of the story, and obviously in the context of a story, that probably the best thing that he could have done was to tell. But also in the context of like being his character in the story, there's obvious reasons why you'd be quite hesitant to be like, well, I heard this voice in the wall and it was moving, and I followed it, and the next thing I know, here I am, and there's a cat hanging from the thing, and yeah, I didn't do anything. I mean, it sounds like you're making up a story. So, Anyway, so they get the hell on, and they get up a little bit further, and they duck off into a classroom for a minute before they go back to Gryffindor Tower, and Harry addresses this issue. He's like, do you think I should have told him about the voice? And Ron's like, no. Nope. He's like, no, hearing voices just isn't a good sign. And this is, as it turns out, I just was watching a part of the movie looking for a screenshot the other day, and they gave that line to Hermione in the movie. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world. So, and Harry's like, you do believe me, right? And of course Ron's like, no, of course, but it's strange. And he's like, yeah, no, it's quite weird. And then, of course, they finally come around to the subject of what was actually written on the wall, which is, the chamber has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. And Ron's like, sounds kind of familiar. Something about a secret chamber. Secret chamber. See, we're like piecing it together already. Foreshadowing. And Harry's like, oh, and by the way, what's a squib? And Ron like kind of laughs, and then he's like, but no, it's not really funny. It's just because it's Filch. Which, I mean, lets you know Ron's always kind of like on the decent side of things. No, okay, not always. He does sometimes just do like really stupid shit, but most of the time it's because of jealousy or anger, or feelings of inferiority. But in stuff like this, like he understands like basic. Like he's the one who gets pissed when Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood. It's the same thing. Like he wouldn't necessarily think it was cool to just call somebody a squib or make fun of them for being one. Maybe is the better way of putting it. But again, because it's Filch and they don't like Filch. So yeah. And so that's where Ron explains what I already explained about what squibs are, and he's, of course, Ron, with his sage wisdom, it's like that's why he doesn't like students very much, which is true, but still, it's like the Hal Mullen moment where you just state the obvious right quick. Anyway, and so after they have that little combo, they head off to bed and scene. And so, of course, for the next few days, that's everybody's talking about the attack on Mrs. Norris. And Filch is like pacing the area. They see him trying to scrub the message away. And that's what I was saying earlier. It's like, for some reason, even though it's clearly blood, like it's been put up there in some sort of magical way that's like preventing it being. I mean, blood's not. There are, if bleach can clean blood in the Muggle world, obviously there's a magical way to get rid of blood. Because I mean, obviously. So there's something funny about this, but that's never really explained. It's just one of those weird things. Although, obviously, it doesn't stay there forever, because, like, nobody ever, like, later books is like, and then they walk down the corridor with that famous message, enemies of the air, beware. It's like it's gone. Some Dumbledore finally decided to clean it or something. I don't know. Let's see, right, and Filch is trying to use Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but that doesn't do it either. And Ginny update, it's mentioned that Ginny seems very disturbed by what happened to Mrs. Norris, and that's, of course, because the night that it happened, she found blood on herself. And didn't remember where she was, but we don't find that out till later. Spoiler alert. Right, so Ron tries to make a joke about Mrs. Norris. Ginny looks sad, and he's like, no, it's gonna be fine. Like, this doesn't happen very often in here. Like, they'll figure out who did it, and they'll be out. And of course, Ron has to make a joke like, and hopefully they'll just get Filch too, and then get expelled. And he's like, no, just joking, because Ginny's like freaking out. Not freaking out, but she just looks like it's having a more of an effect on her than anybody could possibly imagine. Let's just say that. And now Hermione's been at the library a bunch again because she's trying to figure stuff out. As it turns out, she's just looking for a specific book, but which I don't understand why that would take a lot of time. It's going to be in one place. But, yes, and so then we get the whole thing where, like, people start thinking that Harry is the heir of Slytherin, because obviously this whole enemies of the heir beware has like started like this theory that the heir of Slytherin is at Hogwarts right now, and so Harry is like on his way to go meet Ron at the library, and he spots Justin Finch Fletchley, who is Muggleborn, And as Harry like sees him and is about to say hello, Justin sees him at first, or not first, but sees him, and then turns abruptly away and like heads off in the opposite direction. And Harry is like, But yeah, so there's people who are basically starting to think that that's what's up with Harry. Blah 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 stuff about history homework. Hermione's poring over the library. I mean, maybe she's looking in other books too, but Harry tells Ron about Justin, and Ron's like, I don't see why you care. I thought he was kind of stupid, but I mean, that's just Ron. I feel like he's saying that more because he's not really down with anybody like dissing Harry, but at the same time, maybe he just did think he was an idiot for whatever reason. I don't really understand why. I mean, maybe just because he's so formal in the way that he acts. He does kind of talk like he's like 20 years older than he is, or more than that. But anyway. So then Hermione arrives, and she finally tells us that she's been looking for Hogwarts history, which, again, that's not really like something that would take very long to find out. So clearly she must have been looking in other books to try and find this information. But anyway, we find out that she is, hang on. Yeah, that she's trying to find out about the Chamber of Secrets. And they're like, what's that? And she's like, that's what I'm trying to remember. I feel like I read it somewhere, and she left her copy at home, of course. And Ron tries to copy Hermione's homework, and she's not having it. Yes, and so they go to History of Magic, and because that's their next class, and there's something different that happens here, so that's why that's brought up really in the first place. Is most of the time they don't really talk that much about this class, except for just to remind everybody that it's boring. Anyway, so they're in there in the middle of doing their Goblin Rebellions stuff, which seems to be like a large bulk of this particular year's lessons. Oh, no, this was, I'm sorry, I take that back. It was the International Warlock Convention of 1289. Anyway, and so Hermione puts up her hand in class, which, again, nobody puts up their hand, and they just take notes and fall asleep. And so, yeah, Hermione's like, can you tell us anything about the Chamber of Secrets, Professor? And suddenly, like, everybody, like, wakes up, kind of, and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Interaction? What's happening? Chamber of Secrets? What's up? And at first, he tries to kind of, at first Ben's is like, we deal with facts here, this is history of magic, blah, blah, blah. And, he tries to kind of go back into his reading again, and then Hermione puts up her hand again, but she's like, but, sir, don't legends always have a basis in fact? And Ben's just like, yeah, that's, I mean, if you're going to argue, that's an argument you could make. And Ben's is just like kind of like a little out of his depth right now. Like he's been teaching 2 classes that don't respond for like decades now, it would appear. So he's just like, wow, okay. And so finally they're like, but he's like, oh, very well. And so we get our like refresher course on the history of Hogwarts and who the 4 founders were, our Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. And blah, blah, blah. They built the castle. Things were great for a while. And then eventually they had disagreements, and Slytherin was an asshole, and he wanted to be a pureblood, prefer, like preferring everybody with magical blood only, no muggle-borns, no nothing else. You have to have all magic families. And so he only wanted that, and everybody else was like, eh. And so apparently, like, him and Gryffindor really got into, like, into it, and Slytherin left the school. Which I think has kind of been covered probably in, well, this is only the second book at this point. I forget. I'm, like, listening, like, 2 books ahead at this point. So, anyway, so he's like, so all that stuff is reliable fact. And then he's like, there's this whole fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets. And the legend, the story goes, whatever, that Slytherin built a chamber that's hidden, and that only his true heir could open the chamber, unseal it, and unleash the horror within. To purge the school of all who are unworthy, which is, kind of fucked. But it would include attacks on squibs and muggleborns, namely muggleborns, because they're the ones that are all over the school. But the squib's cat did get attacked first, worth noting. So, and of course Ben's is like, of course this is all a bunch of bullshit, but, you wanted me to tell you, so here it is. Here's the little story. It's just a story. That's all it is. And they're asking what the horror is, and he's like, there's supposed to be some kind of monster in there that only the heir of Slytherin can control. And he's just like, yeah, that this, there's no chamber, there's no monster. Plenty of Hogwarts headmasters have searched. Dumbledore's searched. And, of course, Seamus points out that, well, if it could only be opened by Slytherin's heir, then no one else would be able to find it, which is a legitimate point, Seamus. But Professor Binns ain't hearing that shit. And Parvati makes another good point, and she's like, well, you'd probably have to use dark magic to open it. And, of course, Binns makes a good point. Well, just because a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't. And he calls her Miss Pennyfeather. One of the jokes in this is that he gets everybody's name wrong because he's calling them, like, the name of some students probably from, like, a class, like, 50, 100 years ago or something. Anyway, they keep trying to, like, go on and make arguments, and eventually he's like, yeah, no, I'm not hearing that shit. We're going back to class. And so 5 minutes later, he's reading and everybody's back asleep. So, yeah, that's the end of that scene. And then, so then we're back with our trio, and Ron's like, I knew Slytherin sucked, basically, but I didn't know he was the one that started all this pureblood stuff. And so, yeah, he's like, I wouldn't be in his house if you paid me. Hermione's like, yeah, you wouldn't. Neither would I. And of course, Harry's like feeling kind of like, Sorting Hat, almost put me in Slytherin. That happened, but I'm not gonna tell you. I haven't told you, and I'm not gonna tell you right now. So, yeah, so he has that, like, memory of what the hat said in the first book. And so, and they're coming down the hall, and they pass Colin Creevy going the other way, who of course says hello to Harry, and he's like, hey, a boy in my class has been saying, but he like is getting shunted down the hall, and he's not able to keep talking. And Hermione's like, what is a boy in his class saying? And Harry's like, yeah, probably that I'm Slytherin's heir. Because, I mean, let's face it, that's probably what's going on. And, of course, Ron's like, people will believe anything. Oh, Ron, I love you. You're Harry's best mate, except for when you're not, which isn't that often, but still, when he's all in, he's fucking all in. That's one thing about it. Mm-mm-mm-mm. And Hermione makes the good point, like, because they're like trying to figure out if they believe that there is a Chamber of Secrets, and Hermione's like, well, Dumbledore couldn't cure Mrs. Norris, and she's like, that makes me think that whatever attacked her wasn't human, and so that's a very valid point, because if it was something that a wizard had done, there would be a pretty good chance that Dumbledore could counter spell it, curse, or whatever it is, hex, etc. And so they're walking, and of course, for whatever reason, they end up right back at the fucking scene of the crime again. And so they're like, huh. And there's Filch's empty chair sitting there, and the message is still there, and then, of course, they're like, it can't hurt to have a little poke around, like that ever goes great for them. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are able to learn a lot, but it's just like, they are definitely little detectives. And so they start looking around, and of course, Harry finds scourge marks on the ground, because, he's like the tracker or something. And then Hermione's like, well, look what I found. And what she found was the spiders getting the hell on. Which is, like, I get why, but it's already been, like, a day or two since the attack. Like, if the spiders were trying to get the hell on, they could have already gotten the hell on. Why are they still leaving? Are there that many? Is the castle that big? Are spiders that slow, even if they're moving all day and night to get the hell on? Whatever. I mean, I understand narratively why they need to be there, leaving. And Ron's like standing at a distance, like, and they're like, I've never seen spiders look like that. What about you, Harry? He's like, no, Ron, what about you, Ron? Yeah, Ron's like, see, what had happened was that, Fred had turned my teddy bear into a big spider when I was 3, and it was moving, and and he's like, anyway, yeah, and so we find out that Ron has a phobia. Spoiler alert, we're going to take that phobia to the fucking nth degree before it's all over with in this book. Right, so Harry's like, let's change the topic, because Ron obviously is feeling real defensive right now. And they're like, what about, he's like, what about that water that was all over the floor? That's gone now, but where do you think that came from? And Ron, like, gets his wits about him again, and he's like, I think it was around here. And there's, like, a door there, and he's about to open it, and then he stops, and then they're like, what? Why are you stopping? And he's like, it's a girl's toilet. And Hermione's like, oh, it's Moaning Myrtle's place. Come on. And so they go and have a look. Even though there's a large out of order sign on the door. And we find out that it is the gloomiest and most depressing bathroom, because of course it is. It's where Moaning Myrtle lives. And so we get the layout of the room and the dull reflected light and blah 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 blah. Right, so they get to Myrtle, and she's like, this is a girl's bathroom. Oh, we we have like a little, tantrum / misunderstanding with Myrtle, where Harry tries to ask Hermione to ask Myrtle if she saw something when he could have just asked her directly. But anyway, and so Myrtle's all like offended, like, why are you whispering behind my back? Which, understandable, but all the same. Also makes the chapter last a little longer. Blah, 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 blah. And so they finally get around to asking her, and she's like, I wasn't paying attention. Peeves upset me so much that I came here and tried to kill myself. Then, of course, I remembered that I'm... And Ron's like, already dead? And she's like, oh. Right, and so then she dives back into the toilet and splashes water all over them because somehow she's a ghost that only impacts water, but nothing else solid. But then she does kind of follow the rules of ghosts and physics are a little strange in this universe, especially when it comes to Myrtle. So yeah. Dun, 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 dun. And Hermione's like, no, really, that was actually kind of cheerful for Myrtle. And so they leave, and no sooner do they step out than fucking Percy is there, like on the spot or nearby, and he like yells at him, and he's like, it's a girl's bathroom. And Ron's like, we were just detectiving, doing our thing. And Percy's like, get away. Don't you care what this looks like? We get like glimpses of where Percy's going all the time. Even though he's well-meaning at some points. And in this case, I would say he's actually well-meaning. And he even says that, he told Ginny that they'd never, that he, Harry, and Hermione had never touched the cat. But Ron does kind of like obviously Percy does care to a certain degree, but like Ron does kind of like touch on a nerve. He's like, you don't care about Ginny. You're just worried about that I'm going to mess up your chances of being head boy. And that's sort of borne out by the fact that the response of that is Percy taking 5 points from Gryffindor. Which I don't know if prefects are supposed to have had that power at this point in the books, but whatever. Anyway, regardless of whether he can or not, clearly he was that statement touched a nerve. But Percy does say no more detective work or I'll write to Mum. So he tries to make it off like he's trying to look out for their best interests. And so they both leave one another with lots of reddening. As Weasleys are wont to do, and scene, and so later that evening, they're back in the common room, sitting as far away from Percy as they can. Ron's in a pissy mood because of Percy. So Ron gets fed up and closes his book and his homework, and as it turns out, so does Hermione. And she's like, who can it be? And they're like, and she's like, yeah, who could want all the squibs and muggleborns out of Hogwarts? And Ron's like, well, let's think. Who do we know that thinks that muggleborns are scum? And she's like, you mean Malfoy? And he's like, of course I fucking mean Malfoy. Which, I mean, you gotta give it to Ron, like in this case. I mean, like who else in the school at this present time is the most likely culprit? I mean, sure, there might be like a quiet person who's doing it, but Malfoy like just as an obvious target, and they also hate him. But even if they didn't, be hard not to. If he was acting the same way, it'd be hard not to think it was him. But Hermione's skeptical. But Harry's like, well, I mean, look at his family. They've all been in Slytherin. You know, he's always running his mouth about that shit. And he's like, they could easily be Slytherin's descendants. I mean, it's been, fucking bazillion years. And they seem, pretty fucking evil. So, I mean, But Hermione's still skeptical. And Harry's like, how could we prove it, though? Because, I mean, us being skeptical one way or the other doesn't really help anything. And Hermione's like, well, I know this one way we might be able to. And they're like, And she's like, yeah, it'll be difficult and very dangerous, and we'll be breaking a bunch of school rules. And Ron's like, well, that's all right. Well, maybe you could get on with the telling. And she's like, fine. And so what she describes, of course, on the surface, before you find out what she's talking about, sounds kind of impossible. She's like, well, we could just get into the Slytherin common room and ask Malfoy some questions without him realizing it's us. And then she, blah, 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 blah. She gets on to telling them about the polyjuice potion, which ends up being it's a plot device that's used from here on out. I mean, maybe not in every book, but it definitely comes into play more once disguises are needed. And it's basically a potion that allows you to transform into the physical image of another person while maintaining your own conscience, your own mind. So it's a physical change, but it's everything but the brain and soul parts. And in most cases, at least the way that it's represented most of the time, it seems that you also take on their voice too. Because you're taking on all their physical traits. So, dun, 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 dun. And so she's like, yeah, that's how it works, and we could, transform into 3 Slytherins, and we can go in there and ask Malfoy. He's probably, boasting about all this shit anyway, because that's what he does. And so there's some back and forth about, like, is it safe, and blah, 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 and what if we get stuck like that, and, Hermione kind of explains a little bit more about, that it is difficult, and that we have to get the book from the restricted section, and so, yeah, and Hermione's like, Ron's like, and how we're gonna get the book. I mean, it seems like if we were gonna get the book, we'd be wanting to make one of these potions, which are like ahead of our, where we are in school right now. And Hermione's like, I think if I just, made it sound like I was interested in the theory, that it would work. And Ron's like, no teacher's gonna do that. They'd have to be really thick. Which, of course, points to Lockhart. And that is where our chapter ends. So, yeah, you know more about squibs than you did before you started this. That happened. Not that, it's really my information, but then again, it wouldn't be. I just a vessel for the info. What else? Anything else that we did? There wasn't enough, Fred and George to really, like, do in my little ongoing quest to try and, like, tell the differences between Fred and George. I didn't really feel like we got enough here to advance that story, but we did get that glimpse of Ginny, the obligatory glimpse of Ginny after the attack, to let us know that she was feeling more out of sorts, so to speak. So she's feeling the effects of what's happening, but she just at this point has no idea what's actually going on. yeah, and we find out about the chamber, and we know now that Harry, Ron, and Hermione have the seeds of a plan to try and figure out if Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin. So yeah, that's where we're at. We will continue to attempt to keep this going a little more regularly, and yeah, have a lovely day, night, or afternoon, or evening, or morning, or whatever it is you're having right now. Enjoy it, and we'll see you next time. Peace.